When I pulled into the neighborhood for the very first time, my truck still humming from the 12-hour drive, I could feel every set of eyes watching me from behind their white-trimmed curtains and perfectly painted doors. The whole place looked like it had been designed by some committee that hated individuality, row after row of identical houses, manicured lawns that were all cut to exactly the same height, driveways free of even a single oil stain. It was the kind of neighborhood where the Homeowners Association didn't just send out friendly reminders about keeping your grass green, they sent out threats, fines, and letters written like they were court summons. I knew all this because I'd done my homework before coming here. This wasn't just some random place I'd moved to. No, this was a mission, my personal project, and the people in charge had no clue who they were dealing with. The house I had just bought was at the very end of the cul-de-sac, sitting slightly higher than the others on a small rise. It had been on the market for over a year, something about the previous owners getting into a feud with the HOA, refusing to pay dues, and eventually abandoning it. The bank had foreclosed, and I had scooped it up for a price that was almost insulting considering how much the other houses in the neighborhood were worth. But I didn't just buy the house, I bought something much bigger. Along with the deed to this property came several commercial real estate parcels nearby, and most importantly, the rental contracts for half a dozen duplexes right outside the neighborhood that just happened to house several of the HOA board members themselves. That was the part they didn't know yet. That was the part that made this more than just another home purchase. This was the opening move in a game I had been planning for months. Before I even had a chance to unload the first box, a golf cart rolled up, carrying two men in polos and name badges, looking like mall cops who'd just been promoted to pretend sheriffs. One of them had a clipboard, and the other one was already frowning as he looked at my truck like it was leaking poison on the road. "You can't park that here," the frowning one said, stepping off the cart with the kind of authority that made me laugh inside. "This is a private road, and all commercial vehicles must be registered with the HOA before being allowed to remain in the neighborhood." I just stood there for a second, taking in the moment. They didn't even ask my name, didn't even give me a welcome to the neighborhood. It was straight to rules, straight to enforcement. I had expected this, but the speed of it was almost impressive. "I just got here," I said calmly, though inside I was grinning. "I haven't even unpacked yet." The guy with the clipboard started writing something down without even looking at me. "Doesn't matter," he said flatly. "If it's not moved within the hour, you'll be fined $200 for a parking violation and the vehicle will be reported." He handed me a yellow slip like I was being ticketed, then turned like he was already done with me. That's when I decided to make this fun. "You know," I said, holding the slip between my fingers, "it's kind of bold of you guys to hand out fines before you even know if I live here or not." The man with the clipboard stopped mid-step and turned back around. "Do you?" he asked suspiciously, like maybe I was just some random squatter who had driven 12 hours to park illegally in their perfect little paradise. "Yeah," I said, pulling the house keys from my pocket and jingling them. "This is mine now." They exchanged a quick glance, the kind of look that said they weren't happy about this but weren't sure how far they could push yet. The one with the frown stepped closer. "Then you should know that we have very strict community guidelines. No commercial vehicles overnight. No exterior modifications without approval." "No," I cut him off with a smile. "Don't worry," I said. "I've read all the rules. Every single one." In fact, I stepped forward and lowered my voice so only they could hear me. "I think you'll find that I know your rules better than you do." They didn't like that. I could tell from the way the clipboard guy tightened his grip and frowned like I just insulted his entire bloodline. "We'll be watching," he said, finally climbing back into the golf cart. "Any violations will be reported immediately." "Good," I said, waving them off like I was dismissing them. "And don't worry, if you have any problems, you can always come to me. After all, I'm the one who collects your rent." The way their faces froze was priceless. They didn't understand yet, not fully, but I could see the flicker of confusion in their eyes. That was enough for now. This was going to be interesting, very, very interesting. The next morning, I made sure to wake up early, not because I'm a morning person, but because I wanted to watch them. Sure enough, as soon as the sun rose and the sprinklers in the neighborhood began their synchronized routine, the same golf cart came buzzing around the corner. This time there were 3 of them, clipboard guy, frowny face, and a woman in oversized sunglasses who looked like she'd been born to judge other people's lawn care choices. They stopped in front of my house, whispering to each other like I couldn't see them through my front window. I let them stand there a moment before stepping outside with a cup of coffee, acting as casual as possible. "Morning," I called out, deliberately cheerful. Clipboard guy didn't even bother with pleasantries. "We noticed you still have that truck parked in the driveway," he said, as if I had committed a crime. "Yeah," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "It's my driveway." The woman in sunglasses removed them dramatically, as if this was a reality TV reveal. "Driveways are part of the community aesthetic," she said with a tone that suggested she'd practiced this speech in a mirror. "Oversized vehicles must be stored in an enclosed garage or off-site facility. You agreed to this when you bought the house." I couldn't help but smile at that. "See, that's the thing," I said, leaning casually against my truck. "I actually agreed to something a little more binding than just following your HOA rules." They all frowned in unison, and for a moment there was nothing but the sound of the sprinklers clicking back and forth. I decided to go ahead and drop the first little bomb. "I'm the owner of the Maple Grove rental properties," I said, letting the words hang there. "You know, the duplexes over on Ash Street?" That got their attention. Clipboard guy's pen actually stopped mid-scratch, and frowny face tilted his head like a confused dog. The woman blinked twice, clearly processing what I had just said. "That's not possible," she said finally. "Oh, it's possible," I said, pulling my phone out and scrolling until I found the property management app. "Here, take a look." I turned the screen so they could see the list of active leases, and sure enough, there were names they recognized. I could tell by the way the blood drained from their faces. 3 of the 6 duplexes housed board members. The other 3? HOA volunteers and enforcers. "So," I continued, sipping my coffee again, "if you're going to start threatening me with fines, just remember, late rent fees are a lot higher." That was the moment the power dynamic shifted. Up until then, they had been treating me like just another new homeowner they could bully into compliance. But now? Now they realized I wasn't just part of their neighborhood. I was part of their lives, whether they liked it or not. They didn't argue. They didn't even try to hit me with another warning. They just stood there for a moment before muttering something about reviewing the situation and driving off in their little cart. I watched them go, already planning my next move. Because the truth is, I didn't come here just to live quietly. I came here to fix something that had been broken for a long time. I'd been reading about this HOA for months before I even bought the property, stories of them harassing homeowners, issuing ridiculous fines for things like leaving a trash can out for 10 extra minutes, and threatening lawsuits over unapproved paint colors. This place had become notorious online, and I wasn't about to sit by and let them keep ruining people's lives. Later that afternoon, I started walking around the neighborhood, introducing myself to neighbors. Some were polite but clearly hesitant to talk, like they were afraid the HOA would somehow find out. Others were more open, and I started hearing their stories. One guy had been fined $500 for having his kid's basketball hoop visible from the street. Another woman had been told she couldn't park her camper in her own driveway, even though she was a retired veteran who used it to travel. Over and over, I heard the same thing: fear. People were afraid of their own HOA. That night, I sat down in my half-unpacked living room with a notebook and started sketching out my plan. Step 1 had already been accomplished: establish dominance. They knew now that I had leverage. Step 2 would be gathering allies. The HOA was only as strong as its ability to scare people into compliance, and if I could break that fear, even just a little, their power would start to crumble. Over the next few days, I started hosting casual barbecues in my backyard. Nothing fancy, just burgers, hot dogs, cold drinks, and an open invitation to anyone who wanted to stop by. At first, only a few people came, nervously glancing around like they expected the HOA police to raid the place. But after the second and third night, more started showing up. Neighbors began talking freely, laughing, swapping stories about ridiculous letters they'd received. It was like a weight was being lifted from the whole street. Of course, the HOA noticed. They sent me a letter claiming that I needed to get pre-approval for any large gatherings on my property. I pinned it to the barbecue table at the next cookout and toasted to it in front of everyone, which made the neighbors laugh even harder. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about giving them permission to stop being afraid. By the end of the week, I had spoken to almost every homeowner in the neighborhood. And more importantly, I had learned one crucial thing: the HOA board elections were coming up in just a few months. When I found out the HOA board elections were just 3 months away, something inside me lit up. This wasn't just about fending them off anymore, this was my chance to take the entire system from them, piece by piece, and make sure no one else ever had to put up with their nonsense again. That night, I sat down with my notebook again, this time sketching out something that looked more like a war plan than a to-do list. I made columns: allies, leverage, risks, and moves. I wrote down the names of neighbors who had come to my cookouts, the stories they'd told me about harassment, the fines they'd received, and the people on the board who had issued them. By the end, I had a map of the power structure in this neighborhood, and I knew exactly where the pressure points were. The first real move came the next morning. I called a meeting with the 6 tenants from my rental properties, 3 board members and 3 volunteers. I didn't make threats, not exactly. I just reminded them that their leases were month to month, and that rent increases were coming up for review soon. The look on their faces was priceless. One of them, the treasurer, actually tried to bluff me, saying something about retaliation being illegal. I just smiled and slid the ledger across the table, a ledger that showed every late payment, every violation of their lease agreement I could legally act on if I wanted to. "Relax," I said finally, leaning back in my chair. "I'm not here to evict anyone. But I am here to remind you that if you keep treating homeowners like criminals, I can make life very uncomfortable for you. So maybe, just maybe, you should stop handing out $200 fines for things like flower pots being the wrong shade of blue." That meeting didn't end with hugs and handshakes, but it ended with silence, and in my book, that was a win. Because silence meant they were thinking. Silence meant they were nervous. A week later, I noticed something strange: the golf cart patrols became less frequent. The threatening letters stopped coming. A few of the neighbors even told me that their fines had been mysteriously waived. But I didn't stop there. Oh no, this was just the beginning. I printed flyers for a community town hall and hand-delivered them to every mailbox in the neighborhood. I wasn't stupid enough to use HOA letterhead. I wanted them to know this was something different, something outside the system. On the night of the meeting, my backyard was packed. People brought folding chairs, coolers, even desserts. It felt more like a block party than a meeting, and that was exactly the point. When everyone had settled in, I stood on my deck so they could all see me and said, "I moved here a few weeks ago, and in that time, I've learned that most of you are living in fear, not of crime, not of losing your homes, but of the very organization that's supposed to represent you." Murmurs spread through the crowd, and I could see people nodding. I went on, telling them about my run-in with the golf cart patrol, about the ridiculous fines, about the way the board treated people like children. I even shared stories I'd heard from neighbors, with their permission, of course, about the harassment they'd endured. The mood began to shift. People weren't just nodding anymore, they were angry. Then I hit them with the final piece. In 3 months, this HOA is holding board elections. And if you're tired of being bullied, if you're tired of living in fear of letters and fines, I say we take the whole thing back. The cheers that went up were louder than I expected. It was like everyone had been waiting for someone to say it out loud. That night, we formed a committee, a real one, not some HOA puppet group. We started gathering signatures, finding candidates, organizing votes. I volunteered to run for president, and to my surprise, no one opposed me. Of course, the HOA board found out about all of this within days, and they did not take it well. The very next morning, I found a notice taped to my front door claiming that I was in violation of several community codes, including one for unsanctioned assembly and another for disruption of community order. I took that notice, blew it up to poster size, and hung it on my garage door where everyone could see it. Neighbors came by all day to laugh and take pictures. That was when the board made their biggest mistake. They tried to fine everyone who attended my backyard meeting. Letters went out demanding $100 disturbance fees, citing noise complaints that never actually happened. That was the tipping point. Overnight, the entire neighborhood turned against them. People started emailing me copies of their letters, asking for advice. Others started forwarding me their entire history of fines and violations, creating a paper trail that was so damning it could have been used as evidence in court. And that gave me an idea. I hired a lawyer, a good one, the kind who eats HOA boards for breakfast, and had him draft a formal cease and desist letter accusing the board of harassment and selective enforcement. We mailed it to every board member's personal address. The following week, the golf cart patrols stopped entirely. The board stopped answering emails. It was like the entire HOA had gone silent, except for one last desperate move. They called an emergency meeting, closed to homeowners, to try to figure out how to stop me. But they forgot one thing: 3 of the people in that room were my tenants. That night, I got a call from one of them, whispering like she was in some kind of spy movie. "They're planning to rewrite the bylaws to make you ineligible to run for office," she said. That was all I needed to hear. It was time to go nuclear. The very next morning, I got to work. If they wanted to play dirty, I was more than ready to get my hands a little messy too. The difference was that I played by the book, and my book had a lot more pages than theirs. I contacted my lawyer again, this time asking him to draft a formal petition to block any bylaw changes that would interfere with the upcoming election. We sent copies to the entire neighborhood and made sure everyone knew exactly what the board was trying to pull. By sunset, my phone was lighting up with messages from angry homeowners, and it wasn't long before word got out beyond our little subdivision. Someone posted the whole situation on a local community Facebook group, and within a day it had gone semi-viral. Suddenly, the board wasn't just fighting me, they were fighting the entire internet. I made a point to stay calm, even as the board ramped up their nonsense. They started sending me violation notices for ridiculous things, leaving my garbage can visible for 5 minutes after pickup, hanging string lights on my porch, even for using my driveway as a workshop, because I'd been assembling a new grill outside. Instead of getting angry, I started collecting them. I taped every single notice to my garage door until it looked like a wall of shame, a public display of their pettiness that every neighbor driving by could see. It became a neighborhood attraction. People would slow down to read them and laugh. Kids started calling it the Wall of Rules. The board must have hated that because the next thing they did was threaten legal action. They sent me a letter claiming that my display was defamatory, and that I had to take it down immediately or face a lawsuit. My lawyer responded with a letter of his own, citing case law that protected homeowners' rights to free speech on their own property. He also added a paragraph about countersuing for harassment if they continued. After that, the threats stopped. By now, I had a small army of supporters. Every time the board tried something new, more neighbors joined our cause. We held more backyard meetings, organized carpool trips to the HOA's official meetings, and even got a few local news outlets interested in covering the story. The board hated the attention, but they couldn't stop it. They were so used to operating in secrecy that having a spotlight on them completely threw them off balance. Then came the best part, the financial audit. One of my neighbors happened to be an accountant, and with enough signatures, we were able to demand a review of the HOA's books. What we found was worse than I expected: shady, administrative fees, overpriced landscaping contracts that just happened to go to companies owned by board members' relatives, and thousands of dollars in unexplained, miscellaneous expenses. We shared everything with the entire neighborhood, printing copies of the report and leaving them on doorsteps. That was the final straw for a lot of people who had been on the fence. By the time the election day rolled around, the HOA board was a shell of its former self. They tried one last trick by moving the meeting time at the last minute, but we were ready for that too. We had volunteers driving around knocking on doors, reminding everyone to show up. When the votes were counted, it wasn't even close. I won the presidency in a landslide, and 2 of my allies took the other open seats. The old guard was officially out. That night, I hosted one last barbecue, this time with music, lights, and half the neighborhood showing up to celebrate. For the first time since I'd moved in, people weren't just talking about how bad the HOA was, they were talking about what we could do to make things better. We brainstormed ideas: community gardens, neighborhood watch programs, even a small park for the kids. When I stood up to give a toast, I looked around at all the smiling faces, the people who had been afraid just a few weeks ago and were now laughing freely. "This is just the beginning," I said. "We're going to make this neighborhood something we can all be proud of, not because some board tells us what we can and can't do, but because we choose to make it that way." The cheers that followed felt like a victory bell. For the first time, the HOA wasn't a threat, it was a tool, one we could use for good. And the best part? I knew the old board members still had to send me rent checks every month. Every time they signed one, they'd be reminded that they had tried to trick me the day I arrived, and lost everything because of it. In the weeks following the election, the neighborhood felt completely different. The tension that had once hung in the air was gone. People were outside more, walking dogs, chatting on driveways, even waving at me as they passed by, which hadn't happened once when I first arrived. My first act as HOA president was simple: I suspended all outstanding fines. Every last dollar that had been hanging over my neighbors' heads was erased. You would have thought I'd just forgiven their student loans from the way some of them reacted. One woman actually hugged me with tears in her eyes. But I wasn't done. I called a full community meeting, not in some stuffy boardroom, but at the local park. I brought in food trucks, rented a big speaker system, and told everyone to bring their families. Hundreds showed up. Standing in front of that crowd, I laid out my vision for what this HOA could be. "This isn't about control," I told them. "It's about community. No more surprise fines, no more threats, no more power games. From now on, everything we do will be voted on. Every decision will be transparent. And if you don't like something, you'll have a say in changing it." The cheers were deafening. It wasn't just about me winning anymore, it was about everyone else feeling like they had won too. We passed new bylaws that day, limiting the HOA's ability to fine residents, capping dues, and requiring a community vote for any big decisions. We even put a rule in place that future board members had to live here full-time, no more absentee dictators. And just when I thought things couldn't get more poetic, one of my former adversaries, Mr. Clipboard himself, approached me at the end of the meeting. He looked tired, like the fight had gone out of him. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," he said. "I didn't think anyone could." "You mean run against you? Or win?" I asked, half smiling. "Both," he admitted. Then he surprised me. "You were right. We went too far. I guess we forgot that we were supposed to be helping people, not controlling them." I nodded, because honestly, I respected him more in that moment than I ever had before. "Then help us now," I said. "We could use people who know how this thing works, just as long as you're willing to do it the right way." To my shock, he agreed. A few weeks later, he was helping us rewrite outdated rules and advising on how to restructure the budget to actually improve the neighborhood. It wasn't just a win for me, it was a redemption arc for him too. Over the next few months, everything changed. The ugly tension between neighbors was replaced by collaboration. We started a neighborhood newsletter that highlighted birthdays, anniversaries, and kids' accomplishments instead of just listing violations. We organized block parties, movie nights, and even a small charity drive that raised enough money to fix the broken playground equipment. For the first time, people actually wanted to pay their dues because they could see where the money was going. And as for me, I kept collecting rent from the old board members, but it became less about revenge and more about a reminder that power isn't about intimidation. It's about what you do with it once you have it. Every rent check that landed in my mailbox was proof that I had changed something bigger than just a set of rules. One night, long after the last cookout of the season had ended, I stood out in my driveway and looked at the house at the end of the cul-de-sac, my house. When I first arrived, it had been just another stop in my life, just another property to manage. Now, it felt like home. And more than that, it felt like a symbol of what happens when someone refuses to be pushed around. The next morning, I found a note taped to my door, but this time, it wasn't a violation notice. It was a thank you card, signed by nearly every neighbor in the community. Inside, it said, "Thanks for giving us our neighborhood back." I smiled, tucked the card into my pocket, and headed off to a board meeting. This time, there were no golf carts, no threats, no tricks waiting for me, just a room full of neighbors who wanted to work together. The HOA had tried to trick me the day I moved in, but now I was the one who set the rules, and I intended to keep them fair. For the first time in years, this neighborhood wasn't just a collection of identical houses. It was a community, and I had made sure it would stay that way.